Good afternoon and welcome everyone to Table for Two with Gillian. And today we have Dr. Chris Hurd from the University of Alberta. Yes, that Chris Hurd, the most famous man in Canada who's been all over the media in the last couple of weeks. So the question you're all asking is, how did we score an interview with Chris Hurd? Over to you, Gillian, to explain this.
Well, I'm delighted and very proud to say Chris Hurd is my son-in-law. He's married to our oldest daughter, and they live out in Edmonton with their family. And we have, especially in this last year, learned so much about the Mars explorations. It's been so interesting because it certainly wasn't on my top priority before Chris was involved with it. So Chris, maybe you could take us back and just sort of discuss how you became involved with it and exactly what your position is and what your job is as far as perseverance and everything involved with this Mars exploration.
Yeah, I'm what's called a returned sample scientist on the mission. And it's a program that a lot of these NASA missions have of participating scientists. So they'll already have set the mission up and in some cases even launched it. And then they put out a call for participating scientists. So it's basically to supplement or complement the scientists that are already on a mission. So about a year and a half ago, actually more like 2.5 years ago, I applied to NASA to be a member of this Mars 2020 rover mission, and then a year and a half ago I was chosen in this role. And so the reason the role has to do with what do you do with samples that come back from Mars, and the major thing that, at least from my perspective, but really a major driver for the whole mission, is it has the capability to drive around the surface of Mars and collect core samples, actually core out pieces of rock, seal them in tubes and carry them along, and not to bring them back, but to actually put them in a cache on the surface for a follow-on mission to bring them back. But that expertise is really important because it's one of the major goals. It's to do the first step in actually bringing samples back from Mars. So I got on the mission, and along with 9 other colleagues, actually the rest are all from the US, and in this call that NASA put out, I can't get NASA money, so the Canadian Space Agency actually supports me for that, so yay, thank you them. And then we also have another 5 scientists from Europe who have similar expertise. We're all experts in what you do with rocks in the lab. And I guess that goes back to my real interest is rocks from space generally, and meteorites from Mars and other places. And I've worked a lot on those, and I've worked on meteorites in the collection at the U of A, the University of Alberta Meteorite Collection, which I curate as well. So that's kind of how I ended up involved.
Great, thank you. So Chris, they talked about, I'm sure everybody's seen, if they're watching the news at all, some of the fantastic photographs that have sort of mind-boggled everybody that's seen them, to see the thought of how we get pictures back from Mars. How fast does it take for, I mean, when the rover landed, we seem to see pictures fairly quickly, a couple of pictures, but how long does that transmission take to pictures that are taken? I'm assuming they're taken by the rover, by Perseverance, and then get sent back to us, or to.
That's right. It takes 11 minutes right now at the speed of light for any transmission to come from Mars to the Earth. So that's something to keep in mind. And the reason why that's significant is that there's a lot of things that are automated. When the rover landed, and the incredible video that we've seen recently was all taken automatically. That video was stored on board. It wasn't even sent back right away. One of the first things that was sent back was a picture from the surface. And that was almost immediate. And that was because as part of the landing process, which is a really risky thing to do anyway, they need to make sure that it was safely on the ground. And so the first picture that was taken was through this clear lens cap, dust cover, showing the shadow of the rover on the surface, and so they could say, hey, we made it, everything looks good. And that was, but then that was automatic. And then in terms of how the rover works, though, on a general basis, is on a day-to-day basis, is that the science team and the engineering team get together and plan out the next day. Or and on Mars we call it a day, a sol. It's 24 hours and 37 minutes long. So it's like if you lived on Mars, you have 37 extra minutes a day. So you could decide what you want to do with that, I guess. But
Read a good book.
read a good book. That's a great idea. But we plan out the next sol's activities, and everything is all planned out to the minute in terms of what it's going to do. And then the commands are uploaded to the rover, and then the rover carries those out the following day. So all the images that are taken, and right now we're in the what's called the surface transitions phase. So we're basically figuring out checking out all the instruments. So the other day, the really high resolution cameras on the top of the mast were checked out. The mast was stood up, and then there was a 360 panorama that was taken, and then other images have been taken since. And those are all kind of like pre-planned, so that to check that instrument out. The great thing, of course, is that as geologists, we can start to look at the rocks and everything in those pictures and start to wonder what they're made out of and speculate away. But yeah, so that's how that happens. And then as we go forward, it'll be the same type of thing. There'll be planning done the previous, basically the previous day leading up to the following sol on Mars, and to plan the activities. Right now, what's interesting right now is that because of that difference in the length of the day, the team, mostly engineering, but the team is on Mars time. The people who are actively involved, not me. The first 90 sols of the mission, everything is done on Mars time to maximize the amount of time. And because the day is longer on Mars than on the Earth, those people's schedules shift by 37 minutes later, or almost an hour later every single day. So imagine like getting up an hour later every day, going to bed an hour later. You're going to end up being up in the middle of the night eventually, right? Within a couple weeks time. So these people are on a very different schedule right now. It's interesting, but that's kind of what's needed to really make the most of the time right now. After the 90 sols, everything will be on Earth time.
Okay, so when you so the engineering team are the ones that are testing all the parts of the rover, and then when the rover starts to look at taking samples, are you and your team responsible for directing where the samples come from? And when you get samples, what are you looking for in the samples?
Yeah, so for the first part of that question, yes, but it's a whole team effort. There's something like 450 scientists on this mission, and they're all on the mission for different reasons, for to support the instruments. But I mean, generally, we all act as a team to explore Mars. The 15 of us have that particular role of going, okay, you know what, this particular spot is really interesting. We want to get some data from the rover, but you know what, we really should consider taking a sample here as well for these reasons. So that's kind of where we are, the contribution that we make to the overall effort. What are we looking for in the samples when they come back? Well, we are looking, the primary driver for this mission is whether life ever existed on Mars at the time when the rocks in Jezero Crater, the landing site, were laid down. And some of those rocks were laid down at the bottom of the lake. The crater was filled. Or in this delta, or which is from where a river flows into the lake. So we're looking for specific environments recorded in those rocks and all this happened, by the way, 3.5 to 4 billion years ago when Mars was warmer and wetter. We're looking for those specific rocks that could have the best possibility of preserving evidence of ancient life. And so they're going to put a high priority on those particular samples to bring them back.
And Chris, what is the reason for doing this pure exploration and to learn more information? Or is there some sort of effect that as people living on Earth that we could, I know nothing's certain, we could benefit from?
That's a great question. There's a couple answers to that. One, we are primarily exploring to understand, and the biggest driver being, was there ever life on ancient Mars? And that's getting at a fundamental question that we've had, that humans have had for a long, long time, as to whether life has ever existed or could exist outside of our Earth. And so that's almost like a fundamental, almost philosophical question as to, are we alone? In terms of other benefits, there's a couple things. One, of course, is the technology advances that go into this are astounding. So the technology involved, the tools that were miniaturized and put on the rover are the next generation. They could be adapted for use on Earth. We also have, there's another component, another goal to the mission, which is to prepare for human exploration of Mars. And so there's something called MOXIE on board, and it's an instrument that actually takes the carbon dioxide from the Martian atmosphere and splits it to produce oxygen. And it'll tell us, it's testing it in an actual Martian environment, and it'll tell us if it works well. It gives us the technology that we would need if we want to send humans there to explore. Because instead of bringing all the oxygen that you need, you would actually send like an upscale version of MOXIE to sit on the surface of Mars and work away and build up oxygen for use by future astronauts. So there's a lot of kind of different components to this that relate to that question that you asked. Yeah.
Now, Chris, when you look at the construction of Perseverance, I guess how many countries were involved in different parts? You said you had European colleagues, and obviously there's a big group of Americans involved. But as far as who was involved, who was involved in actually the building of Perseverance? Do you have? I'm sure you have that information, but
Well, Perseverance was built at NASA Jet Propulsion Labs. But the instruments, the way that a mission like this works is NASA says, we are going to send this rover and we want instruments that do these types of things. And then they put the call out, it was competed.
okay.
And so those teams, those instrument teams, each have like a principal scientific investigator and an engineering team and other scientists. And they get together and they propose. And so then NASA chose the instruments that were going to be on board. Those instrument teams can partner with international partners. And so although they all have a US-based investigator, some of them have international investigators,
Okay.
like from Norway and Italy and Spain. And so there is an very international component to this mission for that reason. It's almost like because NASA like wants the best of the best of all the possible things that could go on this rover. And so if the best thing is over in like the ground penetrating radar, there's a radar on board that can tell us what's underneath the rover. In that case, they used a technology and a design from a group in Norway, and then brought that in. And so to get the ground penetrating radar that would be most appropriate for this mission.
Okay, I find that really interesting, just to have that sort of worldwide cooperation and interest, like, because, in many areas, we're not so good at cooperating worldwide. So now what is the current estimate that you will get the samples back to actually investigate? Now, I understand, will you get them back on an ongoing basis, or will they come back in one big blob for you in whatever number of years it is?
So they all come back at once,
Okay.
and the earliest would be 2031. It's quite an involved process for this because the rover itself, Perseverance, is not able to bring the samples back. What we'll do is to collect these samples. They'll be sealed in tubes. They'll be brought along within the rover itself, and then we'll put down a cache or like a depot, basically put them down on the ground on Mars. They're all sealed in their tubes, and leave them there. And we may actually do that a couple times, but at least once, if not twice, we're going to put down these caches. And then another mission has to be sent. Current estimates are like launching in 2026 or 2027 to arrive in 2028. That would have a little rover, nice speedy little rover, the fetch rover, that would go and collect up the samples and put them into a canister that's about the size of a basketball, maybe a bit larger, with these little slots in it for the tubes. It could carry probably as many as 30 of these tubes, these sample tubes. And then it would go on a rocket on a lander, presumably the one that brought the rover down, the fetch rover, go on this rocket on the lander and blast it off the surface of Mars into orbit around Mars, where the canister would be rendezvoused by an orbiting spacecraft. And that spacecraft would then, once it has it, would turn around and head back to the Earth. And that would arrive in 2031. And then the capsule would be dropped in probably in the Utah desert, in a place where NASA typically receives these return samples in 2031. And then at that point, it would have to go into a specialized facility, but then it would be made available to scientists all around the world.
It's just so fascinating to me. It really is. It's like, you know, it is like science fiction. Were you a science fiction reader when you were younger? And now?
Absolutely, yes,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. And I'm finding kindred spirits in the people on the mission as well. I think a lot of people were inspired by science fiction literature when they were younger as well. It's just that you know, the imagination that it sparks. And for me, it was even as young as 12 or 13, just reading things like books like by Asimov, which envisioned, you know, people on other planets, and thinking, you know, wouldn't it be amazing to go somewhere else, but also to study the geology of another planet. That for me was really piqued my imagination.
And is he one of your favorite sci-fi authors, Isaac Asimov? Do you have a favorite book of his?
In the classical sense, yeah. I mean, the Foundation series is quite something. It, you know, you read it today, it seems a little dated, because it was, you know, it was written in the 60s, in a different sort of era. Not as much equity, diversity, inclusion, shall we say?
Right.
but still, that idea, you know, the idea of sort of sweeping big picture, you know, humanity exploring among the stars, sort of thing, is quite
Right.
something.
Right.
I have other authors that I like. Kim Stanley Robinson is one. The Mars series is interesting, but there's actually other ones that he's written that are very forward-looking, like what would humanity look like in 200 years from now, and are we on different places in the solar system, and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Oh, good. It's just interesting to get your you know, your history of the whole science. Well, because it seems like science fiction coming to life for me, but right now. So the other question I had for you, sort of veering off a little bit, is I know you're a practicing Christian, so I'm curious to know, and I'm sure we have many scientists that are, do you ever have conflict with that, with your Christian views and your scientific information?
I really don't, and I attribute that a lot to my upbringing. My parents are Christians, and my father is a retired geologist, and my grandfather on my mom's side was a geologist and a Christian as well, and so the sort of an inheritance from them is a recognition that there doesn't need to be a conflict between the two aspects. And so for me, it really, it's I guess I'd learned to integrate the two aspects of my life relatively early on. Although, you know, there was a sort of a period there in the teen years into university where I kind of needed to wrestle with that a little bit more. But I do feel like there's a lot to be that Christianity and faith can give to science, and or even just sort of the daily life, as well as what science can give, and the imagination that's required for science and exploration can give to our faith lives.
Right. I think that when, I'm going to be optimistic and said, when we can all travel again, I think, Chris, I'm going to have to get you to come to, the whole family come here to Ottawa, and I'm going to have you come and speak at the church and actually discuss that in detail, because I find it really interesting, you know, the balance of the two. So I think we'll have to make that a future date, hopefully in the not too distant future, for sure. But
Sounds good to me. Yeah.
yes. So I want to thank you for taking the time to do this. I know since you've been involved with it, we have hooked onto the NASA Facebook page, and I love getting all the information. If anybody that's listening wants to delve further into it and see some of the fabulous pictures coming back, it's a really great resource for sure. So take time to do that if you're interested. But Chris, I really appreciate it. I know you've been so busy the last 2 weeks and been doing one interview after the other, and I just really appreciate you taking the time today.
It's my pleasure, and it's good to see you and talk to you
It's
again,
lovely
Gillian.
to see you too. Take care.
You too.